Welcome to the Common Man Football Show. My name is James Coburn, and today's episode, we're talking about college football bowl game predictions and analytics, part 2. As you know, if you've been following at least this series of videos, did a video about the bowl games that happened this last weekend, and now I'm going to focus on all the bowl games that are happening this week, all the way up until the weekend as well. And specifically, we're looking at analytics related to these football games. So this isn't my opinion about how these games are going to turn out. This has nothing really to do with that at all. It's basically looking at a bunch of different team-based data statistics and coming to some sort of conclusion based on the aggregate of all that information as to who might win these football games based on all that information. Now, all terms and definitions are going to be in the description. So if there's anything I'm talking about today that you're not familiar with, if there's any of the terms or any of the things that on the actual data that you're not familiar with, you can just refer to you can refer there and kind of get all your information there from that kind of perspective. So, but this is essentially what we're doing. So now let's get to the games. So the games we're going to highlight for this video are as follows, all the games that are right here essentially. So first off, let's start with Akron versus Florida Atlantic. Based on all the data that I have, Florida Atlantic is heavily favored in this game. The O/DPts score, which is basically offensive points and defensive points allowed. So the more offensive points you score, the higher your score is, and the lower points you allow on defense, the higher your score is. Both those things combined is probably the most important data point out of all these data points. Every data point is important. They all matter to a degree when it comes to winning football games, but one thing you're going to learn, which is pretty obvious, is if you score more points than your opponent and you don't allow as many points on defense to your opponent, you're going to win more football games. And based on that O/DPts score, Florida Atlantic is favored in that particular game. And not only that, if you look at other indicators, Florida Atlantic they just score more points, better completion percentage. Defensively speaking, their defense is also a little bit better in a lot of different areas. So it's pretty much a clean sweep, at least for them. And special teams wise as well, Florida Atlantic is also favored because of that. Then the next game we have Louisiana Tech versus SMU. Based on this particular game, it's really, really close. We're talking 52.80 to 52.27. So that's SMU versus Louisiana Tech. For example, if you just look at the O/DPts score. So this is actually a tough one. It's a tough one to really predict per se. If I was actually going to go with a team in this game, I would go with the offensive team, the SMU team, because they score a lot more points than Louisiana Tech. However, there still is some underlying issues, I guess, with this particular game. So I would go with SMU. But keep in mind that it is a fairly close game when you look at the overall O/DPts score. Then we get to Florida International versus Temple. In this particular game, Florida International is favored 39.58 to 32.67. Fairly close as well, but Florida International does have the better offense, so I would tend to go with them in this particular game. Then we get to Ohio versus UAB. This is another game where it goes to Ohio. Ohio has a 81.52 O/DPts score. UAB has a 66.41. So Ohio is definitely favored in that particular game. Then we get to Central Michigan versus Wyoming. This game actually favors Wyoming 59.31 to 55.60 for Central Michigan. So I do expect Wyoming to win that particular game. Then we get to South Florida versus Texas Tech. Probably a fun game to watch, offensively speaking, but South Florida is heavily favored in this game. It's a 91.84 to 51.69 for Texas Tech. The only thing that Texas Tech really has going for it is that they did play a fairly tougher schedule So they do have that kind of going for them, that South Florida, played kind of a lesser competition schedule. However, that doesn't take away from the fact that South Florida just has tons of positives everywhere you look on offense and defense. And that's why South Florida is favored in that particular game. Then we get to Army versus San Diego State, excuse me. This particular game goes to 83.30 Army, 88.71 San Diego State. I would tend to lean towards San Diego State in this particular game, but it definitely is pretty close and could go either way, potentially, because it is a fairly close game. A lot of games where it's like 5 points difference between the two, or 6 points, 10 points even, those are games that I think are pretty close when it comes to most of the data. Then, of course, we get to Appalachian State versus Toledo. This particular game goes to Appalachian State, 87.11 to 82.53, but again, very close. Toledo actually has the better offense. Most teams that have the better offense typically win more often than just having the better defense. But that doesn't mean that teams that are more balanced don't win football games. It's just that typically offensive teams do win more games. And that's the only thing I would say is that even though it does favor Appalachian State, I would slightly maybe go Toledo if you're playing the offensive-minded angle, which you could do because it's such a close game. 5 points, about 5 point difference between the two. And finally, final game to look at this week, Fresno State versus Houston. Fresno State 77.85 to 67.42 for Houston. Another game where there is a lot of data favoring Fresno State. Fresno State does not have the better offense, but they do have a slightly better defense. They're also very good when it comes to the turnover ratio. They don't turn the football over a lot. They don't create a lot of fumbles. They don't create a lot of interceptions. And as a result, they're pretty much favored in the game because of that. But it definitely is a fairly closer game than usual. 10-point difference is still not the biggest margin to feel really, really confident. You definitely feel confident, but not super duper confident about a victory there. But definitely favors Fresno State in that particular game. So overall, these are the general thoughts and opinions about the games this week based on data. Again, all terms and definitions are in the description. So if any of this stuff I talked about, you can just go there. If you just want to do your own little work by yourself when it comes to these games, if you just want to like pick games for fun and that sort of thing, like you're in an office setting or whatever, and you just want to, do that kind of thing, you can use the data however you want. All I would say, again, as I've emphasized in other videos, the big indicators are the O/DPts score, the PCT O/D, which is basically completion percentage, offense plus defense score, the TO O/D, which is the turnover ratio for offense and defense combined score as well. Strength of schedule is not the biggest deal in the world, but it does give you context. None of the teams that I talked about today, other than say Texas Tech, really have a big effect when it comes to their strength of schedule, in the sense that not a lot of the teams played such a poor strength of schedule or such a strong strength of schedule that it might kind of change what the data actually says about them, if you will, or like have some sort of degree of influence. So, but not a lot of the games this week kind of deal with that, but definitely something to kind of think about in the future games that will come up next week. But these are all the games this week. Of course, my name is James Coburn. You can find my other work at draftcoburn.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Geometrics. And if you like this content and you want more content like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Share this video as well with anybody that you know. And I will talk to you guys in the next video. Peace.